On graduation day, my son embraced his mom's new husband first, called him the one who helped me get here, and didn't say my name once. I applauded quietly from the back row. That evening at the party, he gave me the catering bill. I looked at him, let it fall to the floor, and walked away without saying a word. What would you do if your own son, the one you raised, stole from you and then told you, to your face, that you didn't deserve to be called dad? For years, my silence was my prison, a slow, suffocating ache. But then, it became my most powerful weapon against the people who tried to erase me from my own son's life. My name's Kyle. I'm 46, and I never thought I'd be the guy sitting alone at the back of a graduation ceremony, clapping quietly for a son who looked straight past me. But life has a funny way of humbling you, especially when family is involved. I want to tell you about that day. The day my son, Brandon, walked across the stage, hugged another man first, called him the reason he made it, and never once acknowledged me. I didn't throw a fit. I didn't make a scene. I just sat there, clapping along with everyone else, silent, invisible. That silence, though, carried a weight that only grew heavier as the night went on. Let me rewind a little. I was never the absent dad. Not perfect. Sure, I made my share of mistakes, but I was present. I drove Brandon to baseball practices, cheered in the rain during his soccer games, stayed up late helping him cram for exams. His mom and I split when he was 10, and the divorce wasn't exactly friendly. She moved on fast, marrying a guy named Greg within a year. Greg had money, the kind of money I never had. Shiny new cars, vacations every summer, dinners at places where the menus didn't have prices listed. Compared to him, I was the budget dad. My weekends with Brandon were bowling alleys, pizza nights, and secondhand video games. I worried sometimes that I couldn't give him enough, but I told myself that love and presence mattered more. And for a while, I believe Brandon felt that, too. The cracks started showing in high school. Brandon got a car for his 16th birthday. Not from me, of course, but from Greg. A brand new Mustang, red, polished, gleaming. I couldn't compete with that. I got him a decent watch, something I saved up for, thinking it would mean something. He thanked me, but I saw the look in his eyes, the way his hands lingered on those new car keys. After that, things shifted. Suddenly, it was Greg in the stands at games. Greg helping him shop for suits. Greg being introduced to his friends as the guy who taught him everything about cars. Every time I tried to step in, I felt like the backup option. By the time senior year rolled around, it was clear where his loyalties leaned. He lived with his mom and Greg, only dropping by my place when it was convenient or when he needed something. Hey, Dad, can you help me with gas money this week? Dad, I forgot my calculator at your place. Can you drive it over? I told myself it was just teenage stuff, that kids grow distant, but deep down, it cut every single time. I still paid half of everything. School trips, sports fees, even chipped in for prom. I told myself I was doing my part as a father. I thought maybe one day he'd see it. Maybe one day he'd look back and realize I was there all along. Graduation day should have been my moment of pride. My son walking across that stage, diploma in hand, a future opening wide in front of him. I put on my best suit, even bought a new tie. I showed up early, found a seat toward the back. His mom had the front rows reserved with her family, and I didn't want to fight. I sat there clapping for every kid who walked up, waiting for Brandon's name. When it was finally called, I stood and clapped so hard my hands stung. He looked sharp in that cap and gown, smiling wider than I'd seen in years. And then, as the applause filled the room, he came down the stairs and made a beeline, not toward me, not even scanning the crowd, but straight into Greg's arms. He hugged him like Greg had raised him, whispered something in his ear, and when he pulled back, I swear I heard him say, "You're the reason I made it." The crowd clapped louder. His mom beamed. And me? I just kept clapping, even as my throat tightened. My own son didn't look at me once. Afterward, I lingered outside, half hoping he'd come over, half dreading he wouldn't. He did eventually, but only after photos were taken with his mom, with Greg, with her side of the family. When he finally walked up, it wasn't with a hug or even a thank you. He handed me an envelope. I opened it thinking it was maybe a note or something personal. It was a receipt for the catering at the celebration they were hosting that night. "Can you cover this?" he said, flat as stone. "It's kind of your contribution." I looked at the numbers. Thousands of dollars. and then looked at my son standing there with his hand out like I was just a wallet he could tap into. I didn't say a word, didn't yell, didn't argue. I just let the paper slip from my fingers, watched it float to the ground between us, and walked away. No explanations, no excuses, just silence. The same silence I'd been sitting in all afternoon, but heavier this time. Final, almost. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Because it wasn't just about the receipt or the hug or the words he said to Greg. It was everything. Every overlooked moment, every dismissal, every time I'd been sidelined and treated like I didn't matter. I walked away that night with my chest tight and my mind racing. I knew this wasn't the end of it. Something in me shifted. Anger, yes, but also a cold resolve. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not anymore. And as the laughter of their celebration rang out behind me, I realized the silence I carried wasn't just mine anymore. It was going to be theirs, too, soon enough. After walking out that night, I thought maybe my silence would make a statement. That if I didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't beg to be noticed, maybe, just maybe, someone would realize the weight of what they'd done. That Brandon would text, call, something. But silence has a funny way of answering itself. The only message I got that evening wasn't from my son. It was from his mom. She texted, "Kyle, I heard you walked out. Brandon's disappointed." It was supposed to be his night, not yours. I stared at the words for a long time, my hand tightening around the phone until it hurt. His night, not mine. Like I had even tried to make it about me. Like sitting in the back row, clapping quietly, wasn't already me swallowing every ounce of pride I had left. I didn't respond. I couldn't, because deep down I knew it wasn't about me. It was about them. Always about them. The days that followed were like living in a fog. Brandon didn't call, didn't come by. I saw pictures plastered all over social media, him grinning next to Greg, arms slung around his mom's shoulders, the whole family beaming like they'd done this together. There wasn't a single picture of me, not even one. It was like I hadn't even been there. And then the phone call started. Not from Brandon, of course. He stayed silent. But from my ex, Kyle, the photographer's bill came in. "You should cover half. Brandon's planning a graduation trip with his friends, and we've already spent so much. Can you send some money his way? We need to get him set up for college. Books, housing, deposits, all of it adds up. You know it's your responsibility, too." Each time her voice carried that tone, that sharpness like I was already failing just by existing. And each time I reminded her that I was already paying child support, already sending extra when I could. But she never saw it as enough. It was never enough. I asked about Brandon directly once. Just once. "How's he doing? Has he said anything about that day?" She sighed like I was a child pestering her. "Kyle, don't make this about your feelings. Brandon's moving on with his life. If you really cared, you'd step up more instead of sulking." Sulking? That word hit me like a brick. Was that what they thought this was? That I was sulking, pouting like a child instead of drowning in the ache of being cut out of my own son's milestones? A week later, Brandon finally texted. Short, blunt. "Hey, did you ever pay for that catering? Mom says you walked out." "No, hi, Dad. No, thanks for coming." Not even a question about how I was. Just money. Always money. I typed out a dozen replies. The first was angry. "Do you realize what you did?" The second was hurt. "I was there, Brandon. I clapped for you, even when you ignored me." The third was desperate. "I love you, son. Don't push me away." But in the end, I erased them all and sent nothing. If my only worth to him was a bank account, then I had nothing left to give. But the silence didn't last long. My brother Dan called me out of the blue one evening. He lives 2 states away, but somehow even he had heard the story, twisted around. "Kyle," he said, "why are you trying to ruin Brandon's graduation? Mom told me you stormed out after making a scene about money." I nearly dropped the phone. A scene? A storm? I'd said nothing. Done nothing. Just walked out. But already the story had been flipped, warped, spun into a version where I was the villain. The selfish father who couldn't handle his son having another role model. "Dan," I said carefully, "that's not what happened." I sat in the back row. I clapped. He hugged Greg and called him the reason he made it. Then he handed me a receipt for thousands of dollars and told me to cover it. I didn't say a word. I dropped it and walked away. "That's it." Dan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That doesn't sound like Brandon. Are you sure you're not exaggerating?" That cut deeper than I expected. My own brother doubted me. Believed their side before mine. I ended the call quickly before my voice could crack. After that, things only got worse. Brandon started coming by less and less. Not that he came often before. When he did, it was usually to pick something up. A box of his old stuff. A tool he borrowed. Once even a spare suitcase because Greg was lending him one, but it wasn't big enough. Each time he came in like my place was just storage, not a home. Barely said 2 words to me. No hugs, no thanks, just in and out. One Saturday, he stopped by unannounced. I was in the garage fixing up an old lawnmower. He walked in holding a list. Mom said you should handle these before I leave for college. He dropped the paper on my workbench and started to walk away. I picked it up, my eyes scanning the items. Dorm supplies, electronics, even a request for a new laptop. Thousands of dollars worth. Brandon, I said slowly, why are you giving this to me? He shrugged. Because you're my dad. Isn't that what dads do? Something in his tone wasn't just dismissive. It was entitled. Like I owed him, not because of love, but because it was my function, my role. I tried to keep my voice steady. Brandon, I've been paying child support all these years. I helped with prom, with sports, with trips. I can't just write checks for everything. He turned, finally looking at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger. It was disappointment. Greg would have done it without complaining. That sentence hung in the air like smoke. Greg would have done it. Greg would have handled it. Greg was the dad he wanted. I don't even remember what I said after that. Something about doing what I could, about how money doesn't grow on trees. He left without another word, slamming the door behind him. I sat there in the garage long after he was gone, the list still in my hand, my heart pounding like I'd just been punched. The thing is, it wasn't just Brandon. It was the whole family. My mom called a few days later saying she understood why Brandon leaned on Greg more. He provides stability. Kyle, maybe you should accept that he's the better father figure. Better father figure. The words echoed in my head like a drum beat. It was like no one saw me anymore. No one remembered the years I spent holding everything together when my ex was out partying, when Greg wasn't even in the picture. And then came the final straw. I found out through Facebook, of all places, that they'd thrown Brandon a going-away-to-college party. Huge event, balloons, banners, a catered spread that made the graduation look small. Dozens of photos of Brandon smiling with his mom, with Greg, with all the relatives. Not a single invite had come my way. Not even a courtesy call. I sat there scrolling through those pictures, my stomach churning, my chest tight. And then I saw it. A picture of Brandon holding up a new laptop, grinning wide. The caption, thanks to Greg for always making sure I have everything I need. That was it. That was the knife twisting in the wound. Because it wasn't just that I'd been excluded. It was that they wanted me erased, rewritten out of my own son's life, replaced by someone else who had the money, the shine, the spotlight. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of my own heart. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just hurt. I was done. Something in me shifted from pain to cold resolve. Because if they thought I was just a silent spectator, if they thought I'd keep clapping from the back row while they pushed me further and further out, they had no idea what was coming. And that was the night I decided I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. The turning point didn't come all at once. It crept in like a slow leak, drip by drip, until the floor beneath me gave way. By the time I realized how deep it ran, it was already too late. It started with a phone call, of all things. I was at work, sitting at my desk, staring at spreadsheets that didn't matter half as much as the silence that had been growing between me and Brandon. The phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen. For the first time in weeks, my heart lifted. I thought, maybe this was it. Maybe he was reaching out to talk, to bridge the distance, to finally say something that sounded like the boy I used to know. I answered, trying to sound calm. Hey, Brandon, how's it going? His voice was clipped, businesslike. Dad, I need you to co-sign something. My chest sank, but I forced myself to stay even. What is it? A loan for school. It's not that much, but Greg said his credit's tied up right now. Mom said you'd do it. I froze. Co-sign. My mind immediately went to the risks. My credit wasn't perfect, but I kept it steady. I couldn't just throw it on the line. Brandon, do you know what that means? If you don't pay it back, it's on me. It affects my credit, my finances. He huffed. That teenage exasperation I'd grown used to, but sharper now, older. It's just college stuff, Dad. Stop making it a big deal. Greg said if you cared about me, you'd do it. There it was again. Greg's name. Always Greg. Always the measuring stick. I swallowed hard. Brandon, it's not that I don't care. I've been supporting you for years, but co-signing is serious. It's not just money, it's risk. I need to think about it. His silence on the other end was deafening. Then, flat as ice. Forget it. I'll ask Greg. Click. I sat there staring at my phone, my hand trembling slightly. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone, like I'd failed a test I didn't even know I was taking. I tried to push it aside, tried to focus on work, but it gnawed at me all day. That night, I called him back. No answer. I texted, Brandon, I just want to talk. Can we meet up? Nothing, just silence. 2 days later, I got my answer. Not from him, but from the world. I was scrolling through Facebook during lunch when I saw the pictures. Brandon and Greg shaking hands, both smiling wide. The caption, proud to help my son take his first big step into adulthood. Co-signed his first loan today. Sky's the limit. My fork clattered onto the plate. My stomach churned. He had gone to Greg. Not just gone to him, but celebrated it publicly. Called him dad in the comments when someone congratulated him. And me, I was erased again. I told myself that was the betrayal. That was the moment. But it wasn't. The real blow came a week later. I'd been out running errands when I got a call from my bank. Mr. Harrison, we're calling to verify a transaction on your account. My blood ran cold. What transaction? A transfer, $2,500. It looks like it was initiated online. Authorized under your linked devices. I nearly dropped the phone. I hadn't made any transfer. That's not me. I said quickly. Cancel it. But the woman's voice was calm, steady. It's already cleared, Mr. Harrison. I'm afraid it's gone. Do you recognize the recipient? Brandon Harrison. The world tilted. My son's name. My own bank account. He had accessed it. Somehow, he had gotten in. I raced home, pulled up my laptop, and sure enough, there it was, a transfer to his account. $2,500 gone. My hands shook as I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his tone annoyingly casual. Hey, Dad. Brandon, I said, my voice low and tight. Did you take money from my account? Silence. Then, not even guilty, just defensive. I needed it. Mom said you'd help. You always say you can't, but you can. I just made it easier. I couldn't breathe. You stole from me. Do you understand that? That's stealing. He scoffed. Stop being dramatic. It's for school stuff. You're supposed to support me, Greg said. If you won't step up, then maybe you don't deserve the title of dad. That broke me in a way I can't even explain. My own son parroting Greg's words, stripping me of the one role I'd clung to when everything else was taken. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just whispered, Brandon, you crossed a line you can't come back from. He hung up on me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the lights off. The house too quiet. My hands pressed against my temples. My chest aching. Memories flooded in. Of holding him as a newborn. Of teaching him to ride a bike. Of late nights with hot cocoa when he was sick. All of it washed against the image of him smiling next to Greg, calling him dad, stealing from me without a shred of remorse. And then the final twist of the knife, a text from my ex. Kyle, don't go making a big deal about the money. Brandon just borrowed it. If you try to shame him, don't bother coming around anymore. He doesn't need your negativity. He has a real father figure now. A real father figure. I dropped the phone on the table and just sat there in the dark, numb. Because it wasn't just Brandon anymore. It was the whole system. His mom, Greg, even Brandon himself, they'd all decided my place. Not at the table, not in the front row, not even in the picture. Just gone. And that was the betrayal. Not just the money, not just the loan, not just the words. It was the final erasure of who I was, the father I had been, the years I had given. That was the night something inside me went cold. The love was still there. It always would be. But it was buried under a new resolve. If they wanted to write me out of the story, fine. But I wasn't going quietly. And for the first time in my life, I started thinking not about how to hold on, but how to let go on my terms, not theirs. Rock bottom doesn't announce itself with a crash. It doesn't even arrive all at once. For me, it came in waves, quiet, suffocating waves that pulled me under until I didn't even realize how far I'd sunk. After the money was stolen, things between me and Brandon went silent. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of a door slammed shut. Weeks passed without a single word. No calls, no texts, no visits. I knew he was busy getting ready for college. But I also knew the real reason. He didn't want to see me. Didn't need to. He had Greg, his real father figure. The man with the money and the open wallet. Me? I was the empty seat in the back row, the guy you called when you needed a bank transfer and forgot to say thank you afterward. I tried to push through, to keep living my life. But it wasn't much of a life anymore. Work felt hollow. I'd sit at my desk staring at spreadsheets, but my mind would be replaying that conversation. Greg said, "If you won't step up, then maybe you don't deserve the title of dad." Those words burned like acid. Nights were worse. I'd come home, heat up something from the freezer, and sit in the dark living room, the glow of the TV bouncing across empty walls. My house felt less like a home and more like a holding cell where I was left to stew in my own thoughts. And then the whispers started. Not literal whispers, but the sideways comments from family, friends, coworkers. My brother called again saying, "Kyle, I don't know what you did, but Brandon told everyone you tried to guilt him over money. He said, you made him feel like a burden." A burden. My son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders at carnivals, taught how to drive in my beat-up sedan, sat with during his first heartbreak, was now telling people I made him feel like a burden. It wasn't just family, either. At work, my manager, who'd known me for years, pulled me aside. "Everything okay at home, Kyle? You seem distracted. People are talking." I wanted to laugh, but it came out as a choke. People were talking, all right. My name, my role, my identity, it was all being rewritten without me. And the worst part was I couldn't even fight it. If I tried to defend myself, I'd sound bitter, vindictive. If I stayed quiet, I looked guilty. Either way, I was the villain in someone else's story. Financially, the hit from Brandon's theft hurt more than I let on. I wasn't swimming in savings. I lived carefully, paycheck to paycheck, with a little cushion. Losing $2,500 wasn't just an inconvenience. It was rent, bills, food. I filed a dispute with the bank, but they said since the transfer was authorized through a linked device, it was considered legitimate. My own son had known enough of my passwords, my information to get in, and now I couldn't even prove it wasn't me. So, I tightened the belt. No dinners out, no extras, just bare bones. At night, I'd sit with unpaid bills spread across the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, and wonder how it had come to this. Not just the money, but everything. How had I gone from being a father, a man with purpose, to this hollow shell, alone with receipts and regrets? But the hardest blow came the day Brandon left for college. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. I didn't even know his move-in date. I found out the way I seem to find out everything now, through pictures online. My son smiling in front of his dorm, his arms wrapped around his mom and Greg. The caption, "Couldn't have done it without you guys." You guys, not me. Never me. I sat there staring at the screen, my chest aching like someone had pressed a weight against it. I had dreamed of that day for years. Helping him move into his dorm, carrying boxes, setting up his desk, maybe grabbing lunch together before I drove home. Instead, I was a ghost, watching from a distance as someone else lived the life I had imagined. That night, I didn't eat. I just sat on the couch, the house dark, my phone buzzing with notifications I couldn't bear to read. For the first time, I felt something dangerous creep in. An emptiness so deep I wasn't sure I wanted to climb out. I thought about what it would mean if I just stopped. Stopped showing up, stopped paying, stopped existing in his story. Would anyone notice? Would anyone care? But then, in the middle of that spiral, a thought cut through. A small, quiet voice. Not a scream, not a plea, just a whisper of clarity. They already act like you don't exist, so why not give them exactly what they want? The idea rattled me. At first, it felt like defeat, like giving up. But the more I sat with it, the more it felt like something else. Power. Control. For years, I had been clinging, begging for scraps of acknowledgement, paying for the privilege of being ignored. What if I stopped? What if I took myself out of the equation? Not as punishment, not as a tantrum, but as a choice. I started small. I went through my finances line by line, cutting off anything that tied back to them. The automatic transfers, the extra support, the little help requests that drained me. I closed the joint savings account I'd once set up for Brandon's future. I changed my passwords, locked down my bank, my credit, everything. I told myself it was just practical, just smart. But deep down, I knew it was more. It was me building walls where the doors had been kicked in. I also started writing things down, Not just bills or numbers, but moments. Times I'd been erased, manipulated, stolen from. Dates, receipts, texts. A record of all the ways I'd been pushed aside. At first, it was just for me, a way to process. But slowly, I realized it was more than that. It was evidence, proof that I wasn't crazy, that this had happened, that I hadn't imagined being replaced in my own son's life. The pain didn't go away. Every night, I still sat in the silence, staring at the empty chair across from me. I still scrolled through pictures of Brandon smiling with Greg, my stomach twisting. I still woke up with a knot in my chest that didn't loosen until late afternoon. But now there was something else woven into the pain. A thread of resolve. Because I knew this couldn't go on forever. Either I would drown in it, or I would find a way to turn it, to take back control of the story that had been ripped out of my hands. I wasn't ready yet. Not then. I was still too raw, too hollow. But I could feel it deep down, the beginnings of something, a plan forming, quiet and steady, like a storm gathering on the horizon. And as I sat there one night, staring at the pile of receipts and bills on the table, I whispered to myself, soft but certain, this isn't the end. Not yet. When people talk about moving on, they make it sound like flipping a switch. You're down, then you're up. Heartbroken, then healed. But in reality, it's not like that. It's messier slower. Some days you wake up and feel like you can breathe again. Others you're back on the couch at 2 in the morning with cold coffee and regret. For me, the climb out of that pit didn't come from some lightning bolt of inspiration. It came from smaller choices, quiet ones, the kind nobody else noticed at first, but I did. It started with my mornings. For months, I'd been dragging myself out of bed at the last possible minute, rushing to work half awake, mind already fogged with bitterness before I even clocked in. One morning, for no real reason, I set my alarm an hour earlier. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, just listening to the hum of the world waking up outside. It felt different, calmer, like for once, I was in control of my time. That one choice snowballed. I started walking after work. Just half an hour around the neighborhood at first, hands shoved in my pockets, but eventually longer, further. The fresh air cleared my head. My body, stiff from months of sitting hunched in the dark, loosened up. I didn't realize how much I'd let myself go until I started moving again. I joined a gym, not one of those fancy places with smoothie bars and trainers yelling motivational quotes, just a small local spot where the equipment was old but sturdy. At first, I was awkward, fumbling through machines I barely understood. But over time, I got stronger. I'd catch my reflection in the mirror, sweat dripping down my face, and think, there you are. You still got fight left. It wasn't just physical. At work, something shifted, too. For years, I'd been coasting. Reliable, yes, but never pushing. After everything with Brandon, I realized how much of myself I'd been giving away outside of work, leaving nothing for my own future. So, I started volunteering for projects, taking on extra responsibilities, not to prove anything to anyone else, but to prove it to myself. My boss noticed. You've really stepped up lately, Kyle, she said one afternoon. I was thinking of putting you in charge of the new account. It's a big one. That project changed everything. It was demanding, stressful, but I threw myself into it. And when it succeeded, when the client signed a long-term contract, my name was the one they thanked. Within months, I was promoted. Not a massive jump, but enough. Enough to feel the ground under my feet again. Financially, the raise gave me breathing room. I paid off debts I'd been carrying for years. I rebuilt the savings Brandon had drained. I even started investing carefully in things I'd always been too scared to try before. It wasn't about wealth, not really. It was about stability, about knowing I wasn't one misstep away from drowning again. Socially, I'd kept to myself for so long that I'd forgotten what connection felt like. But little by little, I let people back in. A coworker invited me to grab dinner after a long day. And instead of declining like I normally would, I said yes. Then another yes, and another. Soon I had a small circle again. People who saw me as Kyle, not as Brandon's dad, not as the bitter divorcee, but as a man rebuilding himself. And the strangest part, I laughed again. Real laughter, the kind that shakes your chest. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd heard that sound come from me. Of course, the ache for Brandon never went away. It was still there, like a scar you can't ignore. I'd scroll past pictures of him at college, parties, football games, smiling with Greg and his mom, and my chest would tighten. But instead of spiraling, I'd close the app, lace up my shoes, and go for a walk. I was learning that the pain didn't have to own me. I also started therapy. At first, I thought it was weakness, sitting in a room, spilling my guts to a stranger, but that stranger helped me untangle knots I'd been carrying for years. Helped me see that my worth wasn't tied to Brandon's approval or my ex's manipulation or Greg's shadow. For the first time, I started to believe it. Then came an opportunity one hadn't expected, a chance to move. A promotion came with the option of relocating to a bigger city, managing a larger branch. At first, I hesitated. This had been my home for decades. It was where Brandon had grown up, where every memory, good and bad, lived. But then I thought about those memories, how they weighed me down like anchors. And for the first time, I realized I wanted out. So I took it. The move was exhausting but freeing. New apartment, new office, new routines. Nobody here knew me as the father who'd been replaced or the ex-husband left behind. I was just Kyle. Hardworking, dependable, funny in a dry way that people appreciated. The air felt lighter. And with distance came perspective. I realized that for years I had been feeding a machine that only chewed me up. I had been handing over my money, my time, my energy, and getting nothing in return but contempt. Out here, away from all of it, I could finally see it clearly. I stopped checking Brandon's social media as much. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need to anymore. His life was his, mine was mine, and mine was starting to look pretty good. Financially, I was stronger than ever. I'd saved enough for a down payment on a small condo, and I bought it. My name on the deed, no one else's. For the first time, I had something that was entirely mine. Physically, I felt better too. The gym wasn't just a routine anymore. It was a release. I ran farther, lifted heavier, pushed harder. My body changed, sure, but more importantly, so did my mind. The man in the mirror didn't look broken anymore. He looked determined. And socially, well, let's just say I wasn't as lonely as before. I wasn't rushing into anything serious, but I went on dates. I laughed with people over drinks, went hiking on weekends, even tried salsa dancing once. I was terrible, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Through it all, though, I never forgot. I never forgot the graduation, the receipt dropped on the floor, the stolen money, the erasure of my name from my son's life. Those memories didn't fade, they sharpened. But instead of breaking me, they fueled me. Because while my life was improving, theirs wasn't perfect. Word traveled, even across distance. My ex had a way of overextending herself. And Greg's finances weren't as bottomless as they pretended. The cracks were showing. Arguments, debts, obligations piling up. And I knew deep in my bones that one day they'd come knocking again. Not out of love, not out of guilt, but out of need. And when that day came, I wouldn't be the same Kyle sitting silently in the back row. No, this time I'd be ready. Life has a way of circling back. You think you've moved on, left the past behind, but then the past finds a crack in your walls and seeps back in. By the time mine did, I wasn't the same broken man I'd been. I was stronger, calmer, sharper, and for once, I was in a position to choose how I wanted to respond. It started with an email. Simple subject line, "Hey, Dad." I stared at it for a long time, the cursor hovering above it. It had been months since I'd heard from Brandon, maybe close to a year. The last time we spoke, he had stolen from me, called me less than a father, and slammed the phone down. I thought I'd never hear from him again, but there it was. I clicked. "Hey, Dad. I know it's been a while. I'm in college now. Things are good. Classes are expensive, though, and I was wondering if you could help out with some tuition and maybe books. Mom and Greg are already doing a lot, and I figured you might want to contribute, too. It would mean a lot. Let me know. Brandon." No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just money. Straight to the point. For a moment, the old ache flared up. The father in me wanted to respond, wanted to say yes, to remind him that I was still here. But the man I had become, the man who had clawed his way back from the bottom, knew better. I didn't reply, not right away. Instead, I sat back and thought. That email wasn't just a request. It was an opportunity. Because here's what had changed. I wasn't desperate anymore. I didn't need his approval, his recognition. I wasn't clapping from the back row, begging for a glance. I had my own life, my own stability, and that meant for the first time, I had leverage. I let the email sit. A week later, another came. This one less casual. "Dad, I really need your help. The financial aid office says I'm short for next semester. If I don't cover it, I might have to take a break from school. Mom said you'd probably step up, please." I could almost hear the strain in his words, the shift from entitlement to desperation. I didn't smile, not exactly, but something inside me steadied. I had been waiting for this. Not consciously, but deep down. The moment they realized I wasn't disposable after all. Around that same time, I stumbled onto something unexpected. At work, part of my new role involved overseeing contracts and accounts for local businesses. One of the clients we worked with happened to be a mid-sized construction company. And wouldn't you know it, their biggest subcontractor was none other than Greg's firm. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but the more I looked into it, the more I realized just how tangled the threads were. Greg's firm wasn't as bulletproof as they liked to present. In fact, they were overextended, juggling multiple contracts, running on razor-thin margins, relying heavily on credit. One late payment, one failed bid, and the whole house of cards could start to wobble. That's when the ideas started to form. I wasn't out to ruin them. Not yet. But I realized I now had insight, knowledge, and a position that gave me access to information Greg probably assumed I'd never see. I knew his timelines, his payment structures, his dependencies. I knew where the cracks were, the stress points, and that knowledge? That was power. Meanwhile, Brandon's emails kept coming, each one more insistent than the last. "Dad, why aren't you answering? This is serious. Do you even care if I drop out? Greg said you probably don't, but I want to believe you do." That one stung. Even when he was asking me for help, he still dragged Greg's name into it. But instead of anger, I felt something else. Patience. Because I knew now that his need for me would only grow. College was expensive. Life was expensive. And the well he thought was bottomless, Greg's wallet, wasn't as full as he believed. I finally replied, short and careful. "Brandon, I've always cared, but you need to understand that support is more than money. Let's meet and talk." I sent it and waited. A day later, he agreed. We met at a cafe near his campus. He looked older, more tired, but still my son. When he saw me, he gave a quick hug, the first in years. For a second, the father in me nearly melted. But then he launched into his pitch. "Dad, I really need help. Tuition went up. Books are insane, and I can't work enough hours to cover it. Greg and Mom are trying, but they're maxed out. I just need a loan or a cosign or something." I sipped my coffee steady. "Brandon, do you remember what happened the last time I cosigned? Or the money that disappeared from my account?" He shifted, uncomfortable. "That was a mistake. I was young. I shouldn't have done it. But I'm serious now. I need this." There it was. Not an apology. Not really. But a crack, a tiny sliver of acknowledgement. I didn't push it. Not yet. Instead, I nodded. "I'll think about it. But understand, this isn't just about money. It's about trust." He nodded quickly, eager, desperate. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. The dynamic had shifted. He needed me, and I wasn't going to give blindly anymore. After that meeting, I went home and started planning in earnest. I reviewed my finances, my assets, my position at work. I didn't want to destroy Brandon. He was still my son, after all. But I wanted to shift the balance, to show him and the rest of them that I wasn't the invisible man they could erase whenever it suited them. Piece by piece, I began putting things in place, strengthening my position at work, quietly building relationships with people who had ties to Greg's business, securing my own financial independence so I couldn't be drained again. I even updated my will, something I'd put off for years. Not to cut Brandon out entirely, but to make sure that what I left behind went on my terms, not through the greedy hands of people who saw me as a bank. And through it all, I kept my silence. Because silence, I'd learned, was powerful. It wasn't absence anymore. It was control. By the time the next email came from Brandon, this one practically begging, I knew the storm was close. And this time, I wasn't the one about to be washed away. Revenge, when it finally came, wasn't fire and thunder. It wasn't shouting across a table or throwing punches in the driveway. It was colder, quieter, like setting a trap and simply watching them walk into it. By the time Brandon's desperation turned into pleading, I was ready. He called me late one night, his voice low, almost broken. "Dad, I don't know what to do. The bursar's office is saying I can't register for classes next semester until the balance is paid. Mom and Greg are tapped out. Please, if I can't cover this, I'll have to drop out." The old me would have panicked, dug into my savings, done whatever it took to keep him afloat. But the man I had become, he just listened. Calm, steady, quiet. I hear you, Brandon, I said. But this isn't something we solve with a quick transfer. We need to talk in person. He agreed immediately, too desperate to argue. When we met again, I chose the place carefully. Not a cafe this time, but a conference room at my office. Neutral ground, professional. I wanted him to feel the difference, to sense that this wasn't father and son over coffee anymore. This was business. He walked in looking tired, thinner than before. The bravado was gone. He dropped into the chair across from me, rubbing his temples. Dad, I need help. Please. I slid a folder across the table. Inside was a packet of papers, copies of every transfer, every request, every receipt I had ever covered. My record of years of support. He flipped through them, his face pale. What is this? This, I said evenly, is everything I've done for you. Every dollar, every sacrifice. You might not remember it, but I do. And I kept proof because one day I knew you'd try to tell me I hadn't been there, that I hadn't stepped up. And that day has come. He swallowed hard, eyes darting over the pages. Brandon, I'm not saying no. I'm saying if I help you now, it comes with conditions. Real ones. This isn't about money anymore. It's about respect. It's about acknowledgement. He blinked at me. What do you mean? I mean, I said, leaning back, that if I step in, you stop treating me like a wallet you pull from when Greg's credit card runs dry. You acknowledge me as your father publicly, not just in private. You stop erasing me. His jaw tightened. You want me to what? Post about you. I want you to tell the truth, I said. To stop pretending I wasn't there. You don't have to sing my praises. Just stop cutting me out of the picture you paint for the world. He sat in silence, the weight of it hanging between us. I could see the battle on his face, pride against desperation. Finally, he nodded. Fine, whatever. Just help me. But here's where the real revenge unfolded. Because helping him wasn't the endgame. It was the doorway. Through my position at work, I had gained access to information about Greg's firm, enough to know they were hanging by threads. Late payments, over-leveraged contracts,